welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelly Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Leah Paulos is the founder of Press Shop PR and Book Publicity School. Leah has worked at the intersection of books and media for over 25 years, leading publicity campaigns for hundreds of authors, helping them to line up media attention and events, and supporting them as they navigate the somewhat bizarre world of publishing. Leah has spoken about book publicity at many venues, including Columbia School of Journalism and the CUNY Graduate Center. She graduated from Cornell University in 1998 and now lives in Brooklyn with her husband and co-book publicist Andy Davis and their two boys. Leah Paulos, thank you so much for joining today. I am so happy to talk with you. It's always incredibly helpful to get behind the scenes information from those who work within the publishing industry. So let's dive in and start at the beginning. You are the founder of Press Shop PR. Can you talk about what Press Shop does and what led you to start the company?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me first. So Press Shop PR is an independent book publicity firm. So we work with authors basically to get as much attention for their books as possible. I mean, that's sort of the short version. We do that primarily through media. So everything from radio, TV, podcasts, Substacks, whatever, wherever there is an audience that would be a good target for the book, we try to get the author in front of them, in front of that audience. So we work primarily on nonfiction. We do, I would say, about 20% fiction. And, a huge part of our job is figuring out how to pitch a book, how to position it, how to make it legible in a really short period of time, and then figure out who it is that we might be going for. Where is the target reader getting their book news? Where are they getting their regular news? What are they listening to in their podcast feed? And finding those targets and pitching the book. So that's sort of the short story of what we do at Press Shop. I can go in, of course, more in depth, but that's what we do at Press Shop. And then at Book Publicity School, which I am also the founder of, that is our little sister company to Press Shop. And that's where we do workshops for authors, where we sort of teach authors what they need to do, what they can do to promote their own books based on all of the experience that we have at Press Shop, doing it for authors ourselves.
So how did you get into this? What is your background? How did you become a book publicist?
I am one of the rare book publicists who did not start out at a publishing house. Almost all of the independent book publicists have been in the publicity departments at any of the big five imprints or independent presses. My background is in journalism, so I started out on the media side as a writer and an editor at different magazines. So that was actually the best possible training because it's all the same skills. It's figuring out how to create a really compelling story. It's figuring out how to take something, whether it's, a product or a restaurant or whatever it is, and sort of make it interesting to the reader. So that skill was something I learned in magazines, and I apply and use it every single day as a book publicist. And then in terms of how I made the transition, I did that for several years. I was one of those people who just kind of chafed at the jumping on the train and going to Times Square every single day. So To be honest,
Okay.
that was sort of the impetus. I was like, let me get out of this. Um, and I always loved books. And also, once I worked in media, I realized that so many people don't understand how it works. And people were always asking me questions like, well, how can I get in this magazine? Who should I send it to? What should I say? And it's one of those things that when you're in a particular space, it seems sort of obvious to you. But then you come out and you're like, oh, I guess that's actually really valuable information. So that was sort of how I made the jump. It was as a consultant. And then once I got my first author client, I was just kind of off to the races. I was like, all right, I love books. I love authors. I love doing this publicity and consulting. And from there, it's just built from there. And now we've worked with over probably almost 350 authors at this point at Press Shop, and
Mhm.
you know, many more at Book Publicity School. But yeah, that was how I got in. I got in from the media side.
How did you get your first client? And why books specifically? Did it kind of just come together like that, or did you know for sure that you wanted to do, but how did that all
Yeah.
come together?
So I got my first author client. I was actually working with his wife. It was his wife was working in marketing and worked with some toy companies. I did a little consulting for them, and then she was married to Frank Delaney, who is an Irish historical. He writes Irish historical fiction. Amazing man. He passed away a couple of years ago, sadly, but we worked. I worked with him for over 5 years. He had a book a year contract with Random House for about 4 or 5 years. So I was his independent publicist throughout that time. And I mean, I think if there's ever a person to introduce you to a world, the literary world, I mean, Frank
Mhm.
Delaney has this encyclopedic knowledge, this beautiful, rich voice. He was on the BBC. He knows he's just full of amazing anecdotes. So I just kind of got into it that way, and from there, it was word of mouth at first. Um, and I was an English major. I've always loved writing. I've always loved reading. My parents were authors, so the book space was not foreign to me.
Yeah. Do you write yourself?
I do a ton of writing for Press Shop.
Oh, yes.
Writing is a really key part of our work. I mean, that is um, figuring out how to take a book and in less than 300 words make people read this and say, I must see a copy of this and interview them. So, that definitely requires a lot of writing skills. But I have not done creative writing since my early 20s.
How do you decide these days who you're going to work with?
The biggest thing is, I mean, there are a lot of factors, but the way we evaluate projects when they come into us at Press Shop, I mean, first of all, have to like the book and like the message, of course. Um, But then beyond that, we always want to make sure that we see a really clear way to have a successful campaign. So, how we're going to position it, the types of places, and if we think they're going to go for it. And of course, in media, you never know exactly. You can never say, oh, Slate is definitely going to do this, but you can sort of say, within this tier of outlets, like I think we're going to get a bunch. We'll
Mhm.
reach out for these other more competitive outlets as well. Hopefully, one of them will come through. So we always want to sort of have a sense of what a successful campaign will look like, and we have a vision to make that happen. So that depends on a lot of things, what the book is, what the author's platform is like. If the author is hiring us, it's also about expectations. If an
Mhm.
author has expectations that we don't feel like we're going to be able to fulfill, we won't take the book. So it has a lot mostly to do with that, like where we can see the campaign going. We don't ever want to take a campaign or a book if we don't think we're going to be able to make the author feel like it was successful. It's not fun to bang your head against a wall. It's not fun to email and pitch and pitch and pitch and nobody bites. Like miserable for everybody. We want to avoid that at all costs. So that's usually how we evaluate a book. Um, I mean, part of why we built Book Publicity School was because there were so many books that we couldn't take at Press Shop, and we wanted to be able to support those authors, but we couldn't take them all on for full campaigns at Press Shop. So that was why we launched the school, to offer sort of a different way to share our expertise with a wider range of authors.
So, yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about Book Publicity School. Um, you said that you started in order to offer your services to a wider range. What does Book Publicity School look like? What is offered?
That's it. Um, so we have a number of different programs. It's all virtual. We have it's workshops, so it's education based. So basically, in this environment now, publishers require authors to do so much work to promote their own books. The publicity, everyone is strapped, all across the board, editorial, but also publicity and marketing. And so a lot of it falls to authors to make up that lost capability. And a lot of authors are like, I don't know how to do that. I'm an author. I'm not a publicist. I'm not a marketer. Sometimes they're like, I don't like it. Sometimes they're like, I would do it. I just don't know how. So all of these things we heard all the time. And it makes sense. It's the book publicity sort of sits at this interesting intersection between media and publishing. And so both, in order to navigate it well, you have to sort of understand something about both worlds. And both worlds are kind of specialized and opaque and sort of intimidating sometimes. And so if you don't understand how those systems work, what the timelines are, what sort of the protocols, what people expect, it's really hard to navigate it and promote your book. So
Mhm.
that was the thinking, is like, people are really eager, authors are really eager to do this work. They just need some tools and education and a sort of someone to guide them and to give them answers and to give them strategies and feedback. So that's what we do with our workshops. There's a couple different, there's some crash courses, which are one-off 90-minute sessions. They're on a specific topic like writing your pitch or building a media list or author platform, or post-publication promotion. And then we have a 6-week workshop, which has a little bit of all of that. It's really kind of meant to be, okay, like, this is a kind of intensive, we're going to throw a lot of information at you, but in a way that's targeted. I think that's another thing that we try to solve for authors, is that there's so much information out there that it's just hard to even know where to look and which information to ignore,
Yeah.
which information doesn't actually pertain to you. So we do give a lot of information, but with personalized feedback of like, hey, Kelly, this might not be for you, but like, we're going to get into this right now. And that's where you really should put your efforts.
Mhm.
And then we also do a 6-month coaching program, which includes all of the other stuff, as well as one-on-one workshops with me, one-on-one strategy sessions with me, I should say, with my team, resource library, and things like that. So it's been really fun. I love it. The authors are really getting a lot out of it.
What you mentioned, the landscape is changing. Authors can expect to be needing to do a lot more publicity on their own side or hiring their own publicist in addition. Um, Even if they are getting a big five publishing deal. Uh, What what portion of that, I mean, what really can they expect to be doing? And then if an author is deciding, okay, I'm going to take on a lot of this myself, or I'm going to hire my own publicist in addition to the publicist that's working in-house, what does that relationship look like working with the in-house publicist?
Working with the in-house
Yeah.
publicist. Yeah. So in general, most in-house publicists are really happy for the help. They know what they are up against. mostly are really, want their books to do really well, would love to dive in and, spend hours going down these internet rabbit holes looking for contacts. They just don't have the time. So, it really is just an hours in the day problem. They have a ton of books on their plate. So most in-house publicists, I would say, are happy to have the help as long as it's somebody who knows what they're doing. I think
Mhm.
when they get nervous is if it's sort of, kind of a random person that has no experience in the book space, and then they're worried, rightfully, that it could get sort of messy or, um, have other problems like that. But in general, as long as it is somebody who understands the world of book publicity, most of the time they're pretty happy for that support.
Mhm.
I mean, no matter what, it takes a long time these days. I mean, there's all sorts of different elements, and so many things have changed in promoting a book from a publicity standpoint. And it just takes more time now. Before, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was, maybe there were 70 book review editors, and the in-house publicist would, send out the books to these people and then maybe put in a couple specialized people, and that worked.
Mhm.
And now so many of those places don't have book review pages anymore. Of so many outlets have folded. The book review editors are just getting hundreds and hundreds of pitches every week. So to actually do a successful campaign for a book, you really need to do research and find those people that are going to be open to your book, to your topic, to have shown some sort of interest in this genre or theme or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And that just takes time. So, when we work on books at Press Shop, it's often, hundreds of hours we spend on every campaign. Um, so an in-house publicist doesn't have that for every book because they've got a ton of books on their plate.
Right. What is the connection these days between publicity and book sales? What's that direct
Yeah.
correlation?
Yeah, so that's always the big question. So what I always say is there's definitely a connection. If you get a big hit, particularly like a big national hit,
Mhm.
you'll see the numbers pop. You'll see them all pop on Amazon. You'll hear from your editor, but they pop less than they used to.
Mhm.
So, in the past, if you got fresh air 10 years ago, it was like, oh my God. Obviously, still, it's amazing to get fresh air, but it just doesn't have as much of an impact as it used to.
Mhm.
And that's really across the board because people are just, their attention's all over the place. It used to be anytime anybody got in their car, if they were, they often, if they were like an NPR listener, they turn on the radio and Terry Gross would be there. And
Mhm.
now people are like, maybe they're listening to Sirius XM, or maybe they're in the middle of a podcast and they keep it going and they listen to their podcast queue. So people are just, it's a fractured media environment.
Mhm.
Um, so back to sales, what that means is that you do need to be in a lot of different places to get sales. I mean, there's always that idea of needing a number of different touch points before you buy. So maybe you are on fresh air, but then you also are on a podcast and in this bookstore doing this event. So you just really want to be in a lot of different places. But no matter what, the connection between publicity and sales is, there's not a straight line. It helps. You need other things in place for a publicity hit to lead to sales. You need
Mhm.
distribution, if it's in bookstores. And then they'll
Mhm.
see it and, oh, I heard this on the radio. Let me check it out. You need marketing and a social media presence. And, not every book needs everything, but it's not like publicity can't do it on its own.
Yeah.
Publicity needs help from marketing, from maybe advertising, from having the publishers, salespeople go out and aggressively push it with their buyers, their book buyers. Um, so when people come to us at Press Shop, and if they're like, well, am I going to recoup my investment in book sales? I will never say yes. It's not that it never happens. It has
Mhm.
happened many times over, but it's also a lot of times doesn't happen. A lot of times happens over a much longer period of time than the campaign. And also it's something that's just to a certain extent out of the control of the publicist. You can land all of these things and be very strategic about which targets you're going for,
Mhm.
but then how it turns to sales, there are so many other factors there. So usually when people do come for publicity, they usually have more than just sales as a goal. So maybe that's they want to raise their profile so that they get speaking engagements, or maybe
Mhm.
paid speaking engagements. Or maybe they're up for tenure or just want a new job and they feel like it will be helpful. Or maybe they want to set the ground, set the stage for their next book to get an agent if they don't have one. Or if they do have one, maybe they want to give their agent a little more fuel to go and get a better advance or a bigger publisher for their next book.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of different factors, and usually when people come to us at Press Shop, it's usually a combination of some of those plus book sales.
Yeah.
Um, and then plus also there's the element of I spent so long writing this book, it's my heart and soul. I want to talk about it. I want people to read it. And that is a completely valid goal as well.
Well, speaking of spending so long writing the book, at at what point in the writing process should authors be starting to think about promotion? And what are kind of those like first steps to start laying the groundwork? I mean, are we thinking about promotion before we're finishing a first draft? What?
Yeah. I always think it's really a good idea to start as early as possible. That doesn't mean that like you're actually reaching out to people, but as early as possible, start a spreadsheet where you just start brainstorming. You start thinking like, oh, this podcast, that would be great. I'm going to put it on my list for later. Or I just met this, um, you know, book talk person at this party. Let me put their name on this list.
Mhm.
Oh, this other author in my space just spoke at this festival and then followed up. And then I saw an essay that she wrote in LitHub. Let me put those on here. So it's just starting to keep your eyes and ears open for that kind of thing and writing it down. I just cannot
Mhm.
stress enough how important it is to just have a list because in this environment where there are so many different places to go, it's just impossible to keep it all in mind. You have to have a clearinghouse of, okay, every time I see something, every time I go to the bookstore and I see like a book and then I go home and look at where they were covered, like put it into the spreadsheet. So that kind of thinking and just paying attention to what the success of a book looks like what are similar books that are launching, like if you're still in your writing phase, just kind
Mhm.
of make a mental note to pay attention to the books that are coming out now that might have some similarity or maybe from your publisher and what happens to them, like what happens with that launch,
Mhm.
and so that you can then have a little bit more of a roadmap to understand what you're going to be dealing with in the future.
Mhm.
And then also literally have the context, like this is what happened. It's not a mystery. I think so often for authors, it's this feeling like, like this person's talking about it and that person's talking about it. And it seems everywhere, but like, how did that happen? I have no idea. And
Mhm.
usually it happened because somebody is working a really fantastic spreadsheet and making it happen. So I think starting to just have that early idea in your head or that idea in your head early that you're writing this book, but at some point you're going to have to get people to read the book too. And
Mhm.
don't leave that until the last 2 months, for example.
Is it different for nonfiction versus fiction? I know you said you work with a lot of nonfiction, but also 20%
Yeah.
fiction. What are
Yeah.
the differences there?
Yeah. So, and I should say that is at Press Shop. At Book Publicity School, we do work with a lot of
Mhm.
novelists. So the difficulty with promoting fiction is that a lot of opportunities for media attention these days involve interviews.
Mhm.
Podcasts are huge, radio is still big. And it's just harder for a novelist, unless it's somebody who's really well known and then everyone wants to hear what they have to say.
Mhm.
But for authors that aren't known, it's harder for a producer to create or to be confident that they will be able to create a really interesting interview with a novelist about a book that nobody has read, so that's one piece.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that novelists need to do is they need to figure out like what could I speak about in interviews that will be interesting that relates to the book, of course, but what themes and ideas are in here that are going to be that would be interesting to the listeners of these shows or regional NPR, even if they've never read the book and they don't plan on it, because
Mhm.
that's what a producer needs to make sure of. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's one big piece of why it's harder. And then another one is it's hard. It's hard because, and this sounds kind of terrible, but a lot of media people, not if they're reviewing a book, but if they are, maybe writing a little Q&A or an interview, they don't always read the book, the entirety of the
Mhm.
book. And I hate to say it, but it's true.
Mhm.
So, and that's with nonfiction, you can do a perfectly good interview, even if you haven't read the entire book.
Mhm.
With a novel, it's really hard to tell the quality of the novel if you don't read it, and producers don't have time to read every novel they consider. So
Yeah.
that's why we don't do it. And I don't mean that to be really discouraging to novelists. I
Mm.
just sort of mean it to be it's just sort of realistic about how you have to think about it and how you have to position your book. If you are writing a novel, make sure that your press materials have or it's really clear that they can have a conversation with you that will resonate for a wide range of people without having read
Mm. And well, and how do we do that, Leah?
it. Um, okay, so one thing so part of it is in that pitch, but another thing that is, how you position your book in the pitch, which is hard to explain right here. But one thing I will say is it's really useful for everyone, really, but for especially for novelists to include a Q&A with their press materials.
Interesting.
And then the Q&A can almost serve as a little bit of nonfiction you serve up alongside the fiction. So
Mhm.
they can then, read that and say, oh, this novel is, based on your upbringing in the upper Midwest and blah, 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 or whatever, whatever themes or ideas might be interesting. You can put that in the Q&A so that then producers know, like, okay, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to read the entire book, and I don't, but I'm reading this Q&A here, and I bet our readers or bet our listeners would be actually pretty interested in this conversation. So that's one piece. We do that with every book we work with, fiction or nonfiction at Press Shop. We do that,
Mhm.
and we also teach a lot about how to do both the pitch and the Q&A in our Pitch Perfect workshops, because it's a huge part. Like how to you want to give people a lot of different ways into your book.
Mhm.
So maybe they're interested in it from, oh, this is a book that was, based in civil rights era Georgia. That's really interesting. I'm interested in that space.
Mhm.
Um, so you just want to make sure that you're highlighting all the different avenues that people could use to get to your book.
I love that. That's a great tip, a great piece of advice. Um, Speaking of interviews, something I've been thinking about a lot lately is how so many writers, I guess maybe more so creative writers, but are naturally more introverted. And yet, when you're publishing a book and trying to help it become successful, it seems that it requires so much public facing work which can be terrifying for some authors. So, do you have any tricks or tips for writers who are afraid of public speaking, for example, to get more comfortable
Mhm.
doing these interviews and panels and readings and whatnot?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the best thing for both preparing for an interview and reading, you really need a lot of practice. And so I always suggest authors just practice as much as they can, and in different ways. So maybe it's talking, at a dinner party about it, or maybe it's, sitting in front of your screen and starting a Vimeo recording and then watching it and seeing how you did, or maybe it's doing a mock interview with your partner, or you just want to have lots of experiences, lots of different formats, lengths of time, different types of interviews. Um, because the more you talk about it, the better. And also do it about this particular book. I see this a lot where people, like, maybe it's their second book or their third book, and they got pretty comfortable talking about their first and second book. But then when they talk about this book, they just haven't landed on the language, the anecdotes that really resonate. So I always hear from authors at Press Shop, by the end of the tour, they've done all these interviews and they're like, I wish I could just go back and do them all over again because now I have so much more experience. I saw the sort of anecdotes, the jokes that landed, and maybe the jokes that fell flat. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, I mean, this isn't necessarily about being nervous, but it's about just mindset around promoting yourself. Because the other thing I hear from people all the time is like, ugh, I don't want to seem like I'm being so like egotistical or just like self-promotional. I hate that.
Mhm.
And what I would say there is there's no, there's no business, or like you wouldn't open a cafe, or if you were an artist and you're opening an exhibit, like you would never do that and just be like, no, people will find it, I hope.
Mhm.
Never. Like, of course, if you're an artist and you're displaying all your work, you have to promote it. And if your friend told you that and said, well, I just don't really feel comfortable doing that, you'd be like, are you crazy? Of course you have to do that, So I think authors sometimes, just because it feels a little, because like you said, writing is sort of as a solitary endeavor, and there are a lot of introverts. Um, but I think just thinking that you sort of owe it to your work to get it out, and that also to encourage authors not to think of it as self-promotional. Like, it's not about you. You're not promoting yourself, you're promoting your work. And sometimes that distinction is a little bit helpful.
Can we talk about social media?
Sure, if we must.
the the landscape is always changing. It's hard to know what's worth doing and what's not. Do you have thoughts?
I do have thoughts, yes. I think so. There's a lot of things I would say here. I mean, I think I see so many authors feeling incredibly stressed out because I think there's this sort of drumbeat from people as soon as you have a book, the publisher, and everybody's like, okay, you got to get on social media. You got to get on social media. And while there's definitely an element of truth, and we'll get into that in a second, it also doesn't really make sense on its own. It's like, well, how? Which platform? What are you going to say? How long is it going to take? To what community? Where are your readers? And without answering those questions and just being like, do social media, you're just going to like be stressed out and waste time. It's not specific enough. So one thing is, and I'm sure you know it, is that social media can be really, really time consuming, and that you can obviously get a lot out of it, but you have to put a lot into it. So before you start that, you need to, first of all, be really clear about who your target reader is and then which platform they're on. If you have a really serious like economic policy book, Book Talk's probably not for you. You have to kind of like find out where your readers are. Um, so that's one thing. Making sure that the platform is in line with that there's a community of your target readers on this platform. And then you have to make sure that what you're sharing, what kind of messaging you're doing, what you're posting is going to resonate with the type of people you're trying to attract. So, if I, got 10,000 followers doing like a blog about my kids, like, fine, is that going to help my business? No, maybe a little
Mhm.
bit. Maybe I'll find a couple moms who are authors, but like that wouldn't be a great use of my social media energy if the goal was to get clients, for example. So I think that's really important is like to think through all of that. Um, and then you also have to invest in making a community there. So if you just go on and you're like, okay, I've got the perfect message and I know my target readers out there, but I'm not connected with them, you do have to spend time doing that. So, connecting with them, looking at their posts and commenting on them and just sort of making yourself a part of the conversation.
Mhm.
Um, so those are some things I would say. The other things are this with social media changing so quickly, it's hard for anybody to know exactly which platform to be on. Obviously, Twitter was fantastic for authors for a really long time.
Yeah.
Um, Ever since Elon Musk took it over, it's been changing. And now there's a big exodus, not of all people. There's still a lot of people there. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. But there are a lot more people that are starting to spend their time that are in the literary community that are
Mhm.
starting to spend their time on Blue Sky, for example. Um, so, I think for each person, you kind of have to evaluate where you are, what kind of following you have in each place, where which target you're going for, and decide. But I would also say that in this environment, you really want to think holistically about all the different pieces of your platform and your outreach.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
it's not really a time that you can just do, sometime before, a couple years ago. We had several authors that just had huge Twitter followings. That's all they did. And it was fantastic. I mean, we did media, but social media
Mhm.
wise, that was it. They had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So now where people might still have some on X, but maybe they have a couple hundred over at Threads, and they're starting up on Blue Sky, and they have LinkedIn, and then they have their old Facebook page. So you want to sort of keep two things in mind at once. One is you don't want to stretch yourself too thin
Mhm.
because you need time to read, sleep, eat. There are other things in life besides
Breathe.
cross posting on social media. Uh, but um, but also, don't discount the ones that are smaller. You don't need, so say you were on Facebook, you got on in whatever 2011 or whatever
Mhm.
year. You have like 400 people there. You don't really check in that often. Dust it off. Those are still 400 people who know you, who might be interested in your book. Doesn't mean you need to start posting to Facebook all the time, but like maybe go on, make some new connections, post about a couple things over the months, and then announce your book there. That's not, that's just one piece. You want to always think about all the different communities that you have access to that you can share information about your book. And if that's one of them, great.
Mhm. And going beyond social media, what are you seeing working these days? Is it podcasts, smaller podcasts, book tours, more influencer outreach?
Yeah,
What's working best?
that's working best. So I think the things, so it's definitely podcasts are fantastic because they really allow you to narrow your focus. I
Mm.
think that really targeted outreach is key. It's been something that we've been doing a lot for many years now, but even more important now. Like even if there's a podcast that say it has, you know, 400 some downloads per episode, okay, not huge at all. It's
Mhm.
on the smaller side for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if those 400 downloads are people that love your topic, they're enthusiasts about whatever your book is about, great. That's a fantastic hit for you. And when you compare it to the book tours of yore, where you'd fly to Portland and then go to Seattle and maybe down to San Francisco and LA, um, those events, even if they're successful, had 40 people or 60 people if it was really good.
Mhm.
And you had to fly across the country or travel up and down the West Coast. So podcasts you can reach many more people like that, even in a small podcast. So if they're targeted, they're fantastic. So I think podcasts for sure. Anything that's targeted like Substacks, um, niching down is definitely going to be something that is just going to be more and more important. And then the other piece is, like I was just saying before, is you want to be holistic about your approach. Podcasts are fantastic, but also have a website.
Mhm.
Um, also make sure to, tap those old people from Facebook. Make sure to put together a really great contact list so that you can email all the people in your life from, old colleagues or your old neighbors or, you know, whoever, and let
Mhm.
them know about your book. So, you have to think about reaching out to all the different places in your life that you have connections that might be interested in hearing about your book.
Do you have a favorite piece of publicity advice to offer out to aspiring authors who may be looking at getting ready to start trying to promote their first book?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to, depending on where you are in your own timeline, is find some other books. Like try and find like 6 or 10, however many you can handle,
Mhm.
books that you can use as comparable titles from a publicity point of view. So books that have come out in the past year or two that will, if they were covered in this particular outlet, that's a good indication. Like maybe that outlet would be a good one for you to reach out to about your book. So
Mhm.
if you could pick a bunch of those, um, and in your spreadsheet, map out everything that happens. Like just literally put together little case studies. You don't need to write anything about it. Just, all right, what happened this book? Okay, it got like 2 trade reviews. It got a feature in the local newspaper. It did an event at the local bookstore, spoke at this regional book festival, got this award, did an excerpt in Electric Lit, and was on a panel at this university and also whatever else. But, doing that for a number of books that are similar to yours, I would say is one of the best stepping stones to getting started
Yeah.
for a new author because it doesn't require yet knowing how it happens or how to emulate it down the road, but it at least gives you a starting point. Like these are good targets. This is how it happens. It's not magic. It
Mhm.
happens because this set of things happened.
Mhm.
Um, so that's sort of what I would suggest for authors that are getting started, particularly if you're feeling a little just like overwhelmed and I don't know where to start. And I've signed up for 7,000 newsletters about writing and I can't even read them all.
Yeah.
Um, just start there.
That's great advice. And I can see how that would really start to demystify the process
Yeah.
and how it all happens. So, Leah Paulos, thank you so much for joining today. I have learned so much from talking with you. It's been great.
Oh, it has been lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.